Have you ever looked in the mirror and thought, is this really who I am? Not the face you show the world, not the title on your business card or the version of you that smiles at dinner parties, but the part of you that wakes up at 3 a.m., staring at the ceiling, haunted by the sense that something is missing. The part of you that knows, deep down, you've been playing it safe. You provide, you endure, you play your role. But somewhere along the way, you stopped evolving. You stopped fighting for your own mind. Do you ever feel like the fire inside you, once fierce, once wild, has gone quiet? Not dead, but buried. Under responsibility, under routine, under the heavy silence of a life lived on autopilot. And now, something's shifting. You've started to question things, old beliefs, familiar patterns, even the people around you. You sense a crack forming in the mask. And maybe, just maybe, you're wondering what would happen if you tore it off completely. But here's the problem. The moment you begin to change, the world resists. Friends grow quiet. Partners grow distant. They don't say it, but you feel it, that your growth makes them uncomfortable. Because when a man dares to think for himself, to break free from the cage, he becomes a threat to their comfort, to the system, and most of all, to the version of himself that once settled for less. If that sounds like you, you're exactly where you need to be. Once the questions start, they don't stop. You begin to notice how much of your life has been shaped, not by choice, but by expectation. You went to school, you got the job, you bought the house, you did everything right, but something still feels wrong. And that's where the real war begins. Not out there, but in here. It's subtle at first, a quiet dissatisfaction. You stop laughing at the same jokes. You stop agreeing just to keep the peace. You look around and start to see how much of your life was scripted by someone else. Your parents, your culture, your fear. And suddenly you feel like a stranger in your own life. You're surrounded by people, yet somehow alone. You speak, but no one hears the real you. You want more, not more money, not more toys, but more truth, more authenticity, more of you, without the masks, without the filters. But here's the catch. Every step you take toward your own evolution threatens the world around you. People don't want you to change, not because they don't care, but because your growth forces them to confront their own stagnation. And that's terrifying. So they resist. They make jokes. They call you distant. They say you're going through something like it's a disease. But deep down, what they feel is fear. Because when one man wakes up, it makes the rest look asleep. And the truth is, most people would rather stay comfortable in their cage than watch someone else break free. That's why this journey gets lonely. That's why your old world starts to feel foreign. Because you're no longer the man you used to be. But you haven't yet become the man you're meant to be. You're in the middle, between identities, between worlds. It's messy, it's raw, and yes, it hurts. You might feel like you're losing your mind, but that's only because you're starting to build one that's finally your own. This is what most men were never taught. Mental strength isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about facing the chaos within, without running, without numbing, without lying to yourself. The man you were was built to survive. The man you're becoming, he's built to lead, built to stand alone if he must, built to walk through fire without flinching. Not because he's unafraid, but because he knows who he is when the flames start rising. That's the beginning of mental evolution. Not when life is easy, but when you stop asking it to be. Because the strongest men you'll ever meet aren't the ones who smile through the storm. They're the ones who stop pretending the storm isn't there and learn to walk in it. This is your initiation. This is the threshold. Not everyone will understand it. Not everyone is meant to. But if something inside you knows that you can't go back to who you were, then you're not lost. You're evolving. And what comes next will change everything. If you've made it this far, it means something in you refuses to stay asleep. Something in you is restless, not broken, just unfinished. And that's where Nietzsche enters the picture. Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't some academic buried in books. He was a man who stared into the abyss of life, into the pain, the loneliness, the chaos, and said, "Good." This is where real strength is born. He didn't sugarcoat suffering. He didn't try to escape it with blind faith or false hope. He embraced it because he understood what most men today are never told. Pain is not the enemy. Comfort is. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." It's not just poetry, it's a roadmap. He believed that if you want to rise, if you want to build a mind no one can break, you must go through the fire, not around it. You must face your demons without flinching, because the man who avoids suffering becomes soft. But the man who walks into it with open eyes becomes something else entirely. Free. Here's the uncomfortable truth. You don't grow when things are easy. You grow when life guts you, when everything falls apart and no one is coming to save you. That's when you either crumble or rebuild yourself with your bare hands. Nietzsche didn't see suffering as punishment. He saw it as the forge, the sacred place where your identity melts, and your real character is hammered into shape. But pain alone isn't enough. Plenty of people suffer and stay weak. What separates the strong is what they do with the pain. You either let it define you, or you let it sharpen you. That's why Nietzsche rejected the idea of waiting for a savior. God is dead, he said, not to mock faith, but to kill the illusion that someone else is in control of your life. Because as long as you believe there's a plan, a protector, a reason handed down from above, you stay passive, you stay small. But when you realize no one is coming, no one owes you meaning, you have to build it yourself. That's when something radical happens. You stop waiting for permission, you stop begging for answers, and you start creating your own. That moment, when you accept full responsibility for your existence, is the moment you become truly powerful. Not loud, not aggressive, but grounded, centered, dangerous in the best way possible. Because a man who doesn't fear pain, who doesn't run from responsibility, who doesn't hide behind excuses, is a man the world cannot manipulate. Nietzsche called this the beginning of authentic freedom. Not freedom from hardship, but freedom from illusion, from dependence, from self-betrayal. You stop living for applause. You stop conforming to survive. You start living for something deeper: truth, integrity, will. And in that shift, your mind begins to change. Not just stronger, untouchable. So if you're in pain, if you're lost, if you're questioning everything, good, stay there. Because that storm inside you, it's not the end, it's the beginning. Once you realize no one is coming to save you, that the meaning of your life won't be handed to you, you face a choice: collapse under the weight, or rise and create yourself from the ashes. This is where Nietzsche gave us his most powerful idea, the UberMench, the overman. Not a superhero, not a savior, but a man who has transcended the herd. A man who no longer follows rules just because they're written, who no longer seeks permission to exist, who creates his own values and lives by them no matter the cost. The UberMensch is not some unreachable ideal. He's a destination, and the road to him runs straight through everything you've been taught to avoid: pain, doubt, isolation, rebellion, everything your old self was afraid of. He walks through it with eyes wide open, because he understands something most men never do. You cannot become who you are meant to be until you kill the version of you that was built to please others, that version of you that needs constant approval. He has to go. The part of you that plays small to make others comfortable, it has to die. The nice, agreeable, obedient self that never asks hard questions, never makes waves. Burn it down. The Übermensch lives above all that. He doesn't ask, is this acceptable? He asks, is this worthy of me? He doesn't adapt to a broken world. He challenges it. He doesn't wait for change. He becomes it. And because of that, he is feared, not for violence, not for arrogance, but for something much more dangerous: independence. When a man no longer bends to collective pressure, when he becomes his own authority, he threatens the system. He makes other men question their own comfort, and the world hates that. So what does it do? It tries to break him, with judgment, with isolation, with shame. It whispers, "Come back, be like us, stop making us uncomfortable." But the UberMensch doesn't flinch, because his strength isn't borrowed. It's not built on trends, titles, or external praise. It's rooted in something unshakable: his own will to power. That phrase, will to power, was Nietzsche's core idea. It's the raw inner drive to rise, to shape, to impose your own meaning on the chaos of life. It's not about dominance over others. It's about mastery over yourself. The UberMensch doesn't need a crowd. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need a belief system to hide behind. He stands alone, not out of pride, but out of necessity, because truth lives in solitude. Greatness is forged in silence, and transformation demands isolation. Becoming this kind of man isn't comfortable. It's brutal. You will be misunderstood. You will lose people. You will stand in rooms full of smiles and feel utterly alone. But in that solitude, something sacred begins to form. Not ego, not delusion, but clarity. You begin to see through the lies. You begin to sense the cracks in the world around you. You stop pretending, and what rises from that quiet rebellion is a man who doesn't follow maps. He draws them. That's the overman. That's the man who no longer crawls for approval. He walks his own path, not because it's safe, but because it's his. And that, in today's world, that's terrifying. And that's exactly why it's time. There's a moment after you stop pretending, after you begin to walk your own path, when you look around and realize you are alone. Not lonely in the social sense, alone in a deeper, quieter way, alone in your thinking, alone in your values, alone in your refusal to bow to the crowd. And it hits you. Strength isolates, not because you chose it, but because the moment you outgrow the herd turns its back on you. They don't understand what's happening, only that you're no longer playing the game. You've stopped laughing at small talk. You've stopped nodding when you disagree. You've stopped apologizing for wanting more than just comfort and routine. And so they pull away, not always with hate, but with distance, with confusion, sometimes with passive judgment dressed as concern. You've changed. Damn right you have. But that change comes at a cost. There's no guidebook for this kind of solitude. No trophy, no applause, just quiet, and the echo of your own thoughts. And if you're not prepared for it, it can crush you. This is where most men turn back. They crawl back to what's familiar. They water themselves down to be accepted. They shrink just enough to fit the mold again. But if you endure, if you stand in that silence and face it head on, you'll discover something that most men never will. Solitude is a forge. It burns away everything that isn't you. The masks, the lies, the noise. It leaves you raw, stripped, exposed. But it also makes you real. Because when you walk alone long enough, you stop needing validation. You stop chasing belonging. You become your own compass. Nietzsche said, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." He was right. The man who possesses himself is dangerous because he's not for sale. He can't be bribed with status, manipulated with guilt, or silenced by shame. He may walk alone, but he walks tall. And ironically, in that deep solitude, you begin to feel something you never felt while surrounded. Freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind sold to you in slogans and commercials, but the freedom of a man who has nothing to prove and nothing to hide. You realize that solitude isn't punishment, it's power. It's where the voice of your true self finally gets heard. It's where clarity is born. It's where the noise of the world fades and the signal of your life comes through. And when that signal hits, When you finally feel what it's like to be fully aligned with who you are, everything changes. You no longer move for approval. You no longer bend for comfort. You no longer carry dead weight, whether it's habits, people, or beliefs that once defined you. You move with purpose. You speak with intention. You live with a fire that doesn't flicker when no one's watching. That's what solitude gives you. So yes, this path is lonely. It's raw. It's unforgiving. But it's also the only path where you'll ever find the man you were meant to become. If you feel like the world doesn't understand you, maybe it's because you were never meant to fit into it. You were meant to stand apart. And the stronger you become, the more silence you'll walk through. But in that silence, you will finally hear yourself. Once you step outside the herd, once you begin to think and live for yourself, they notice, not with applause, not with support, but with resistance, because nothing threatens mediocrity more than a man who refuses to play small. You won't always see the attack coming. It doesn't show up in fists or fights. It comes quietly, through side eyes, through silence, through subtle comments that carry the weight of 1,000 insecurities. You're acting different. Why so serious all the time? You think you're better than us now? Number. You don't think you're better. You're just done pretending you're satisfied with less. And that's enough to make them uncomfortable. Because when one man dares to evolve, he becomes a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. Your clarity exposes their confusion. Your discipline reveals their excuses. Your courage makes their comfort look like cowardice. And instead of rising with you, they try to pull you back. Not out of malice, but out of fear. This is what Nietzsche called slave morality. A morality created by the weak to shame the strong. A system that punishes ambition, mocks independence, and calls real power toxic. Why? Because if strength is noble, weakness must be faced. If greatness is possible, mediocrity becomes a choice. And no one wants to admit that they chose smallness. So they rewrite the rules. They call humility a virtue, when really it's just fear in disguise. They praise niceness while resenting anyone who tells the truth without flinching. But here's the truth. The crowd doesn't hate you because you're arrogant. They hate you because you remind them they settled, and they will come for you. Not with facts, not with logic, but with numbers, with consensus, with the suffocating pressure of fitting in. They'll try to drown you in their comfort, to bury your fire under layers of sarcasm, guilt, and noise. They'll say you're too intense, too driven, too much, and you'll be tempted at times to believe them, to question your own path, to shrink just enough to be accepted again. Don't. That's how they win. That's how the system stays intact. Not through violence, but through subtle conformity. Because the true war isn't fought with weapons. It's fought with pressure, to be liked, to be normal, to be just like everyone else. But you weren't made for normal. You were made to lead, to disrupt, to challenge the rot beneath society's smiling surface. And that's dangerous, not because you're a threat to others, but because you're a threat to the lies they live by. You weren't born to dim your light just to make others comfortable in the dark. You were born to stand, even when you're the only one standing. So when the world pushes back, when it tries to shame you into silence, remember this. They don't attack what doesn't matter. They don't resist what doesn't threaten. They only go after what they fear. And a man who has reclaimed his mind, a man who walks alone, a man who doesn't need their approval, terrifies them. So be terrifying, not through anger, not through pride, but through truth. The truth of a life lived on your terms. And that truth will always be louder than the noise of 1,000 cowards whispering the same lie. By now you know the truth. Becoming unbreakable is not a gift. It's a decision. And like all decisions that matter, it comes at a cost. You will lose things on this path. Friends who only like the weaker version of you. Opportunities that required you to stay silent and obedient. Comforts that once numbed the ache in your chest but never truly healed it. You'll lose the ability to pretend, to fake smiles, to bite your tongue, to sit in rooms where your soul doesn't belong. You will lose illusions that someone will rescue you, that the system cares, that playing it safe leads to peace. You'll watch the scaffolding of your old identity fall apart, and you'll have moments, dark ones, when you ask, was it worth it? The answer? Yes, every time. Because for every piece you give up, you gain something far more powerful, yourself. You gain clarity, the ability to see through manipulation, performance, and pretense. You gain presence, the power to stand firm, even when everything around you wavers. You gain peace, not the soft, quiet kind, but the warrior's peace earned through fire. You begin to notice something else too, that most people are walking through life in a fog, sleepwalking through routines, sedated by distractions, numb to their own potential. And your presence, your lucidity, becomes a signal. Not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. You'll walk into rooms and not say a word, and still shift the energy, not because of status or wealth, but because your mind cannot be bought or bent. That kind of strength, it echoes. It lingers after you leave. It forces others to confront the gap between who they are and who they could be. That's not arrogance. That's impact. But here's what makes it rare. Most men stop before they get there. They flinch. They fold. They go back to being accepted instead of being authentic. But you didn't stop. You're still here, reading, thinking, feeling every word. That makes you different, not special, prepared to carry the weight that freedom demands, prepared to walk through life awake, even if the rest of the world stays asleep. Because a truly unbreakable man doesn't need the world to approve. He doesn't need a map. He becomes the map. He writes his own values. He owns his failures. He speaks his truth, even when it costs him everything. And in return, he earns the only reward that matters. He becomes untouchable from the inside out. Not perfect, not invincible, but rooted, clear, unapologetically himself. That's the power no one can take. That's the kind of strength that doesn't fade with age. It sharpens. It deepens. It spreads. So here's the final truth. Yes, this path is hard. Yes, you will walk it alone. Yes, it will demand more from you than you ever thought you had. But once you've tasted this level of freedom, you will never go back. Because when a man becomes unbreakable, he doesn't need the world to understand him. He becomes the kind of man the world can't ignore. And that is the most dangerous kind of man there is. This isn't just content, it's a battle cry in disguise. Every word, every pause, every line has a purpose. To break the trance. To wake up the man inside you that the world told to sit down and behave. The style is raw, director, unapologetically masculine. It doesn't comfort, it confronts. No fluff, no fake positivity, just truth. Heavy, hard-hitting, and stripped to the bone. We use philosophy as a scalpel. Nietzsche's ideas aren't quoted to sound smart. They're used as weapons. Weapons to cut through illusion, to dismantle the soft, fragile shell of conditioning most men have been forced to wear. You'll notice the repetition, not by accident. It's a hammer, driving ideas deep into your psyche. Every you will lose, you will stand, you will become. It's a rhythm, a ritual, a mental recalibration. The tone is cinematic, dramatic, introspective. Music and silence aren't just background. They're emotional triggers. The pacing builds like a storm, starting with a whisper, ending in thunder. Because that's what this is, a psychological transformation told like a war story. There's no hero, no savior, just you, the man staring into the fire, deciding whether to turn back or walk through it. And by the time the screen fades to black, one thing is clear. You don't need permission to rise. You just need the will to do it.